There used to be a pond about half a mile from the old house I grew up in, a place I visited often, drawn there by the stillness and solitude. Locals called it Darrell's Pond, though I never found out who Darrell was or why it carried his name. It didn't really matter. The land wasn't owned by anyone, at least not officially. So every now and then people would wander through and try their luck fishing. But most of the time, it was just me, alone. I had driven a crooked wooden pole into the dirt along the bank where I'd tie off a rope to my small kayak. It was a routine, almost ritualistic. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I slid the kayak into the murky water and paddled out to the middle, to what I called the sweet spot, the area where I usually caught the most. The water was still and the air was calm, with only the occasional rustle of leaves brushing against the sky. As I settled in, I noticed someone emerging from the tree line, a stranger. His silhouette stood briefly between the branches, then stepped forward toward the pond's edge. I gave a casual wave and smiled, just enough to acknowledge him without seeming intrusive. He climbed into a small, weathered boat that had been half floating at the edge, one I hadn't noticed earlier. Without a word, he started to row toward me, the wooden oars dipping into the water with slow, deliberate movements that barely rippled the surface. As he drew closer, just far enough that speaking wouldn't feel like yelling, I figured it was polite to break the silence. "Perfect day, isn't it?" I offered, trying to sound relaxed. "Yes, absolutely," he replied. But that was it. He said nothing more. The silence hung there for a beat too long, and something about it, maybe the way he stared or the hollow tone in his voice, made the air feel just a little heavier. I chuckled awkwardly, the kind people make when they're not quite sure if something's off. Trying to keep things light, I asked, "So, you come out here to throw some lines?" "No, I don't actually fish," he said, flatly. "Oh, well," I replied, forcing a smile, "it's never a bad day to relax on the pond." The words felt thin, like they evaporated as soon as they left my mouth. And for a moment, the pond, so familiar and peaceful, felt strange, like it was holding its breath. He kept rowing, slowly, steadily, until the front of his boat knocked into mine with a dull, echoing thud. The jolt wasn't violent, but it was enough to make me tense up. It felt deliberate. I didn't feel threatened, exactly, just deeply uncomfortable. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, the way he seemed so at ease, so indifferent to how close he'd come. I was only 24, still figuring life out, and here was this guy, mid to late 40s, maybe even 50, just sitting there like we'd planned to meet or something. A heavy silence settled between us. I tried to pretend I was focusing on fishing, watching my line, fiddling with the reel, but honestly, I wasn't thinking about the catch anymore, not even close. This guy was strange, too quiet, too still. I didn't know what he wanted or why he'd come so close, and the longer we floated there, practically touching boats, the more trapped I felt. My skin prickled with that instinctive discomfort you get when someone stares too long. I didn't want to look directly at him, so I angled myself slightly away, half turned toward the other side of the pond. But I could feel his eyes, watching, studying. I couldn't take it anymore, so I stole a quick glance to the right. Yeah, he was staring at me. Not blinking, not smiling, just staring. My nerves were spiking, but I decided to confront the weirdness head on. I locked eyes with him, trying to come off as confident, or at least not rattled. His eyes met mine, cold, unreadable. After about 4 seconds, long, heavy, silent seconds, he finally looked away. Trying to shake the tension, I forced a conversation. "So, where are you from?" I asked. He lifted his hand and pointed behind him toward the wooded hill that sloped up past the dirt road. "Up there." "Oh, you live near Suffolk?" I asked, hoping to place him somewhere. No, I'm not," he replied. The way he said it, stilted, uncertain, sent a weird little shiver up my spine. I tried again. "What made you decide to come out here today?" He paused, then said, "Why not?" Another dead end. I kept trying to fill the empty spaces between us with something, anything, but his answers were dry, emotionless, like he didn't even care to pretend to be social. He gave me nothing. No follow-up questions, no effort to reciprocate. Just sat there, half smiling, eyes always drifting back toward me, or at least hovering somewhere in my direction. The more time passed, the more unsettled I became. I could feel my heart racing now, not from fear exactly, but from this gnawing tension building under my ribs. I was stuck in the middle of a silent pond with a man I didn't know, a man who didn't do anything except sit there, stare, and let silence swallow the space between us. And somehow, that was more terrifying than if he'd done something outright aggressive. At this point, I'd go as far as saying I was nervous for my life. We were surrounded by thick woods on all sides, floating in the middle of a secluded pond with no one else in sight. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It felt suffocating, like the air itself had turned against me. Trying not to show my rising panic, I dipped my oar into the water and slowly began rowing, subtly, casually, angling toward the edge of the pond. I made it look like I was just shifting positions, maybe moving to a better fishing spot. My motions were deliberately slow, unhurried, but inside, every nerve in my body was screaming. Then, I glanced behind me. He was following. His boat glided smoothly across the surface, keeping pace with mine, his face still unreadable. The sound of his oars dipping in and out of the water was quiet but steady, rhythmic, almost mocking. I tried to break the tension, though my voice betrayed the tremor in my chest. "What a great day, huh?" I said. It came out shaky, forced. He didn't respond. I paddled just close enough to the bank where I could step out without tipping the kayak. My hands were clammy on the oar, but I tried to keep calm. Then I finally turned to him and said, "I think I'm gonna call it a day." I looked directly at him, trying to gauge his reaction. He was still staring, but the smile, that unsettling half-smile, was gone now. His face had hardened into something else, something colder. He didn't blink. Then, in a voice flat and final, he said, "I can't let you leave." My blood turned to ice. Then, slowly, he lifted the bottom of his flannel shirt, just high enough to reveal a gun, the handle sticking out from the waistband of his jeans. It wasn't a threat spoken outright, but it didn't have to be. My breath caught. There was no thinking, no decision, just instinct. I dove out of the kayak, hitting the shallows and scrambling to my feet. Mud and weeds pulled at my shoes as I tore through the underbrush, sprinting up the hill. Lungs heaving, adrenaline pumping so hard it drowned out every sound but my heartbeat. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran the entire half-mile through the dense woods, every branch clawing at my arms like fingers trying to hold me back. By the time I reached my house, my chest was burning, my legs were shaking. But I didn't stop until I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. Every lock, every bolt, every latch. I went room to room, locking every window, checking them twice. Then I yanked the blinds down over the dining room window, but left just a tiny crack open, just enough for me to peek through, unseen from outside. My eyes scanned the front yard, watching for movement, for any sign I'd been followed. The sun was starting to set now, casting long, uneasy shadows across the grass. I kept the entire house dark, no lights, no sounds. I just stood there, still peering through that narrow gap in the blinds, heart still racing like I was being hunted. Eventually, finally, I let myself believe he hadn't followed me, that I was safe, or at least safer than I'd been out there. And yeah, I know what you're probably thinking right now. Why didn't I call the police immediately? Trust me, I realize now, just like you do, that was a huge mistake. I left the windows open in my bedroom to let some fresh air in. The room was on the second floor, so I wasn't too concerned about anyone being able to look in. After everything that happened earlier, I just wanted some breeze, something normal, something calming. About half an hour after turning off the lights and sliding under the covers, I started to drift into sleep, until I heard something. Crunch, crunch. Leaves. The sound of dry leaves being stepped on, slowly, deliberately, somewhere just outside. I sat up in bed, frozen, my ears straining for clarity. At first, I told myself it could be a deer, maybe a bear. It had to be an animal. But after what had just happened at the pond, that kind of reassurance didn't last long. My mind was still wrapped in paranoia, and now the fear crept back, crawling up my spine. I sat perfectly still, like a statue. Every part of me was tense, except for the subtle trembling in my limbs. My breath caught in my throat as I waited, listened. The footsteps stopped. Then, breaking the silence, a voice called up to me, low, casual, unmistakably human. "Hey, buddy, you up there? You trying to sleep? Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." It felt like 100 pounds dropped directly onto my chest. I knew that voice. I didn't have to see his face to know it was him. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. Then, slowly, carefully, I slid out of bed and crept toward the door. Every step was deliberate, silent. I made my way downstairs in the dark, avoiding the creaky floorboards, practically crawling past the kitchen window where the blinds were still wide open. I grabbed the phone off the counter, my hands trembling, and moved low to the ground, keeping out of sight. Finally, I did what I should have done hours ago. I called 911. Back upstairs, in the temporary shelter of my bedroom, I whispered into the phone. I didn't know if he could see me or hear me from outside, but I didn't want to take the risk. I stayed low, my back pressed against the wall behind my bed, the phone clenched tightly to my ear. The next 20 minutes dragged like an eternity. Every second, I expected to hear the shattering of glass or the hollow thunk of a door being forced open. Or, worse, his voice again, calling up from beneath my window. But nothing came. Eventually, red and blue lights flickered through the trees. The police had arrived. They did a full sweep of the yard, even checked the woods that bordered the property. They found nothing. No signs of anyone or anything out of place. They told me I should consider staying with a friend or family member for a few nights just to be safe. And I did. I never saw him again, never heard that voice, never found out who he was or what he wanted. But I still moved away about a month later. I couldn't live with the constant feeling that I was being watched, that maybe, just maybe, he'd come back. Every open window felt like a target. Every sound outside felt suspicious. These days, I stick to fishing by the bay. It's wide, open, full of people. I don't go near ponds anymore. There was this one time I went on a fishing trip with my brother-in-law, Jack. Him, a couple of his friends, and my sister. Just tagging along, really. Jack's the kind of guy who's always had it easy. Came from money, never really had to fight for anything. And ever since my sister married him, her life's been cut from the same cloth. Effortless. Everything just falls into place for them. I packed light, just a small backpack with the essentials, enough to spend the night on the boat. It wasn't a long drive, just across town to the wealthier side. Jack's place was right on the bay, not near it, on it, the kind of house where the backyard is the water. A wooden dock stretched from his yard out into the bay, neat and polished, pre-built like something out of a catalog. At the end of it sat his boat, a sleek, luxurious thing with chrome rails and polished deckboards. On the side, painted in cursive, was the name Lexi, my sister's name. He got the idea from Forrest Gump, said it was romantic or something. I guess it's his dream life, and honestly, he's living it. That much I'll admit. We set out early, sun just creeping up, the sky painted with soft blues and golds. Jack had packed the boat like we were heading off on a week-long expedition. The coolers were stuffed with drinks, snacks, and a ridiculous amount of hamburger meat. Not that I was surprised. Because, of course, they had a barbecue grill installed on the boat. A barbecue! That's just how they are. Every outing, every little event, there always has to be something fancy, something extra. If it costs money, they've got it, and they'll show it. It's always been like that with them. And if I'm being honest, it's always been kind of infuriating. A few hours into the trip, it wasn't nearly as fun as I'd imagined. The excitement I had at the start had faded into a kind of restless boredom. Only one fish had been caught the entire time, a largemouth bass, of course, and naturally Jack was the one who reeled it in. He acted like he'd conquered some great beast, showing it off with the same smug grin he wore any time he spent money or won at anything. By that point, they were all well into the booze, laughing louder, slurring their words a little, getting rowdy. I tried to convince my sister to let me have a drink, just one, but she wasn't having it. She kept scolding me in that annoying big sister tone, reminding me I was only 17. That was just like her. Always playing the buzzkill, always acting like someone's parent even when it wasn't needed. In that moment, with the sun beating down and Jack's friends shouting over each other, I found myself wondering why I'd even agreed to come in the first place. Still, there was one part I enjoyed. Lying out on the back deck of Jack's unnecessarily massive boat, letting the warmth of the sun soak into my skin, no one bothering me. That part was nice. The water rocked the boat gently, and for a little while I just let go. The sky slowly turned a breathtaking orange as the sun began to sink behind the horizon. Everything was glowing, burnt gold on the water, long shadows cast across the deck. Jack stepped over to the built-in grill and started tossing the burger patties on like he was hosting some five-star cookout. It struck me as odd. 3 fish had been caught by then, enough for dinner at least. Fresh fish cooked right on the boat. It would have made sense. But no, burgers it was. Not that I complained. Honestly, I'd take a burger over fish any day. By the time we finished eating, night had swallowed the bay. Everything around us had gone dark. No shoreline, no other boats, no lights on the horizon. Just the boat and the endless expanse of water, stretching out in every direction like a void. There was something strangely peaceful about it, but also unsettling. It felt like we were floating in space, like we were no longer part of the world, just suspended in the middle of nothing. Out there, without the boat, you'd have nothing. No land to swim to, no light to follow. Just silence and water in every direction. And the knowledge that without this fragile little vessel, you wouldn't survive the night. By now, everyone on board was either completely drunk or high, some mix of both. Music blasted from the speakers, shaking the cabin walls, while they screamed and laughed like it was some wild party. The boat rocked gently beneath us, isolated in the dark, like we were in our own little bubble floating on black glass. Eventually, they waved me over and invited me to play Cards Against Humanity inside the cabin. I didn't have anything better to do, so I joined them. There was an unopened beer sitting on the counter near the small built-in bar. I stared at it for a moment, then just grabbed it. I was way past the point of caring. And besides, my sister wasn't exactly in any shape to keep playing the overprotective big sister role anymore. By the time I finished my 3rd beer, I had a decent buzz going and was finally able to loosen up a little. The room swayed with warmth and low laughter, and for a moment, it felt like maybe the trip wouldn't be such a waste after all. Earlier, I'd turned down the music a few notches. It had gotten so loud, I couldn't even hear myself think. Jack and his friends were completely wasted at this point, staggering, slurring, cracking up over every ridiculous card they threw down. My sister was drunker than I'd ever seen her, red-faced and teetering, but still more put together than the rest of them. It was fine, though. They were just a bunch of adults blowing off steam, having a good time. We were in the middle of nowhere, calm waters all around us, far from land, far from people. It felt safe, like they could cut loose without hurting anyone or getting themselves into trouble. But then, everything took a sharp, unexpected turn. Over the still playing, now muted music, me and one of Jack's friends both noticed something. A noise, faint, distant, but real. I muted the speaker completely. Everyone fell silent. There it was again, faint voices calling out from outside. We all froze for a second, then scrambled for the deck, or at least I rushed to the edge of the boat. The others stumbled after me, heads craning, squinting into the darkness. Down below, barely visible over the side rail, was a much smaller boat, a battered thing, low in the water. Inside were 2 men, Indian from what I could tell, looking up at us. One of them raised a hand and called out, "Please, we need help." I leaned over the rail. "What's the problem?" The man looked up, his voice tense, maybe even desperate. "We're out of food, no gas. We've been stuck out here. We need help." His words hung in the air for a second too long. And just like that, the party atmosphere cracked, quietly but undeniably. The calm isolation that once felt peaceful now suddenly felt exposed. I looked around at everyone else on the boat, hoping for a second opinion, but quickly realized I wasn't going to get one. Not a real one. They were all way too far gone, not even close to being in the right state of mind to make a sound judgment. Jack was swaying on his feet, and my sister was leaning against the railing, glassy-eyed. It felt like the responsibility landed squarely on me. I didn't like the situation, not one bit. Something about it just didn't feel right. But could I really turn away two stranded guys in the middle of the water? Jack stepped forward and shouted down to them, telling them to wait there while he went to get the ladder. He turned, took a few stumbling steps, then tripped and dropped his beer bottle. It clattered loudly on the deck, foamy liquid pouring out across the wood. I sighed and followed him. As much as I didn't want to, I knew I'd hate myself if I stood by and refused to help. So I helped Jack drag the folded metal ladder across the deck, our footsteps thudding hollowly in the quiet. We hooked it over the edge, securing it to the railing. The two men climbed up, slowly, carefully, and stepped on board. They thanked us, though there was something distant in their voices. Formal, maybe, mechanical. Jack, my sister, and their friends were all still a mess. None of them could string a coherent sentence together, let alone carry a conversation. One of Jack's friends actually waved at them with both hands like a child. I stepped in, trying to smooth things over. Sorry, they've had a little too much to drink. Neither of the men responded. They didn't even nod, just looked past me, over at Jack. Then one of them asked him directly, "Do you have any extra food?" Without answering, we led them inside the cabin and into the kitchen. Jack shuffled over to the counter, pulled a plate of leftover burgers from earlier, and handed them over like it was no big deal. They devoured them. I watched them eat, shoveling food into their mouths, barely chewing. There was something unsettling about the way they acted. Not grateful, not desperate, just robotic, focused. I felt off. No one else seemed to notice or care. Jack gave them a half-empty jerry can of gasoline, stumbled as he handed it over, but managed to get it into their hands. The men nodded, muttered another thanks, and made their way back outside. One after the other, they descended the ladder, disappearing into the darkness below. I stood there, watching until I could no longer see them, and for a brief moment I felt relief. At least they were gone. After that, we all crashed. Everyone picked a spot to sleep. I didn't think too hard about it, just told myself we did a good thing and closed my eyes. Jack and my sister took the bedroom for themselves, of course, which meant I was left with their two friends to figure out the sleeping arrangements in the main cabin. One of them got the pull-out cot, the other grabbed the larger couch, and I was left with the rock-hard excuse for a couch near the side window. I spent about an hour tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, but it was useless. The cushions felt like they were stuffed with bricks. Every time I shifted, the springs creaked beneath me, and the low hum of the boat's structure shifting with the water made everything feel more uneasy. Eventually, I gave up. I got up to get a drink and hit the bathroom. Jack had told us earlier to just pee into the ocean to conserve fresh water on the boat. Not exactly glamorous, but whatever. I stepped outside, opening the door, expecting only the soft, calming rhythm of the bay, the gentle splash of water lapping against the hull. But something else was there. Beneath the water's movement, faint but unmistakable, I heard the low whirring of a boat motor. Slow, consistent, accompanied by the soft churn of water that came with a vessel cutting through the dark. I squinted into the night, but the darkness around us was complete, so thick it was like a wall. I couldn't see a thing. Curious and admittedly on edge, I climbed up to the upper deck where the control panel was and reached for the switch. The searchlight. I flicked it on. The high-powered beam burst into the night, cutting across the water like a knife through fog. A wide, focused arc of visibility suddenly opened around us. I scanned the surface slowly, methodically. Nothing to the left. I rotated the light 90 degrees. Still nothing, just empty water and the reflection of the beam on slow, rippling waves. Another 90 degrees, nothing but blackness. Then, as I turned it further, about 3/4 of the way around, the beam fell on something. There it was, the boat from earlier, sitting low in the water, no lights, just drifting, but definitely moving. Slowly, it was coming closer. I leaned forward, trying to see if the two men were still on board, but before I could make out any details, a scream. Not just any scream, a gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream that tore through the quiet night and sliced straight through my chest. It came from below. One of the guys, one of Jack's friends. And in that instant, everything changed. I jumped from the upper deck and landed hard on the main level, not even stopping to catch my breath as I rushed back inside. The cabin lights were still dim, but the mood had shifted entirely. Gone was any trace of calm. One of Jack's friends was standing in the corner of the room, frozen like a statue, wide-eyed and pale. The other was sitting upright on the couch, clearly just jolted awake by the scream. His breathing was erratic, his head darting toward the hallway. That's when Jack and my sister came stumbling out of the bedroom, still half drunk but quickly sobering up. "What the hell was that?" Jack asked, his voice rough and groggy. The guy in the corner finally spoke, barely. His words came out in fragments, low and shaky. I woke up. They were just standing over me. 2 figures, right there, watching me." He pointed toward the room, then toward the door. "They ran out the front, onto the deck." We all turned and bolted toward the exit, adrenaline overriding the fog of alcohol and fatigue. The deck lights flickered as we pushed through the door and scanned the open space. Nothing. Whoever or whatever had been here was already gone. I immediately pointed out toward the water, toward the exact direction I'd seen that boat just moments ago. The searchlight was still trained on that spot, the beam slicing through the night like a frozen spotlight. But the boat? Gone. No wake, no sound, no silhouette on the horizon. Just empty, black water stretching into nothingness. We searched the boat from bow to stern, checking every cabinet, every locked drawer. It wasn't much, but we wanted to know what they could have taken. That's when we noticed it. A couple of the gasoline cans were gone, and Jack's wallet, along with the keys he'd left sitting on the kitchen table earlier, completely out in the open. Panic hit like a second wave. We didn't waste another second. Jack powered up the engine, and we sped back toward his house, cutting through the water at full throttle, wind whipping our faces, the tension inside the cabin like a vice. It took 4 long, silent hours to make it back. When we finally pulled into the dock and ran up to the house, It was intact. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass. Jack used the spare key hidden in the backyard planter to get inside. Everything looked normal, but none of us felt safe. The very next day, Jack and my sister had the locks changed. But that wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, their home security system caught something. 2 men, hoods pulled low over their faces, approaching the front door just after midnight. One of them stepped up to the handle, clearly trying to unlock it, fumbling with it, testing it. But they couldn't get in. Seconds later, both of them turned and bolted, disappearing into the night. We watched the footage over and over. The grainy black and white video didn't lie. And though we couldn't prove it beyond a doubt, we all knew it was them. We're 99% sure of it. I was 21 years old the first time I went fishing with my grandfather. He was 84. We took a long, winding drive from our suburban neighborhood to a much more isolated part of the state, someplace deep in the woods, far off the beaten path. There was this one particular lake he always went to. He claimed no one else really knew about it, said it was his secret spot. According to him, every time he came out here, he left with coolers packed to the brim with fish. And let me tell you, my grandpa was a hardcore fisherman. I didn't even realize there were different terms for the steps of fishing until that day. He kept throwing around all this lingo I didn't understand, rattling off terminology left and right, even during the drive. Half of it went over my head, but he didn't slow down. Eventually, the main road ended. We veered off onto a quiet, narrow stretch of pavement, then onto a dirt trail that seemed to go on forever. About 2 miles of it, winding and bumpy, surrounded on both sides by thick forest. Finally, he pulled the Jeep off to the side. From there, we had to lug the small boat through the woods. The forest was dense, branches clawing at our arms and legs, roots hiding beneath fallen leaves. And at 84 years old, you'd think my grandfather would be the one struggling, but no, he powered forward like it was nothing. I was the one starting to feel the burn. By the time we reached the lake's edge, I was exhausted, drenched in sweat. But I refused to say anything. I wasn't about to ask for a break, not with him still charging ahead. That would have been humiliating. We launched the boat and rowed out into the center of the lake. Everything around us was calm. The surface of the water was like glass, unbroken and silent, surrounded by towering trees that formed a wall of green. Grandpa had just finished showing me how to properly get the line and hook into the water. His movements were sharp, practiced, like he'd done it 1,000 times. Probably had. After that, he didn't say a word. He sat there in complete silence, eyes locked on the water, as if it were trying to tell him something. His body was still, except for the subtle tension in his shoulders. I turned to ask him a question, something about the bait maybe, but he didn't answer, just kept leaning forward, squinting hard at something near the surface. He looked focused. I waited a second, then asked again. Nothing. He didn't even acknowledge me. Figuring he was just lost in the moment, I let it go. I turned back toward the water myself and tried to mirror his posture, narrowing my eyes as if I too were a seasoned pro, trying to focus, trying to match his silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the lake, or maybe him, felt slightly off. About 20 seconds passed. I couldn't help myself. I turned around again, just to check on him. He was leaning even closer to the water now, practically hanging over the edge of the boat. Something about it didn't look right. His shoulders were stiff, and his face, what I could see of it, was tight with a strange intensity. For a moment, I thought maybe something was wrong, that he'd passed out or was about to fall in. Instinctively, I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. That's when I heard it. Splashing. Sudden and loud, just in front of him, like something had been thrust into the water. My grandfather jerked forward with a shout and shoved something beneath the surface. His body twisted with the motion, and then, at the top of his lungs, he screamed, "Paddle! Paddle as fast as you can! Go, now!" My heart nearly exploded in my chest. I didn't ask questions. I didn't think. I just grabbed the oars and started rowing, my arms burning with every stroke, the boat lurching through the still water back in the direction we'd come. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was bad. Very bad. The moment the front of the boat scraped against the muddy shoreline, my grandfather was already moving, fast. Faster than I'd ever seen him move in my life. He leapt out, leaving everything behind, the gear, the cooler, the rods, the boat itself, and beelined through the woods back toward the car. I was right behind him, adrenaline surging, branches slapping at my arms and legs. We threw ourselves into the Jeep, slammed the doors shut, and he floored it. The tires spun in the dirt before catching and launching us forward, the trail blurring past the windows. I kept shouting at him over and over, "What happened? What the hell did you see?" But he didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. He looked shaken, truly shaken. It took 10 solid minutes of tense silence before he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, low, like he was still trying to process it all. "I was looking down into the water," he began, "and I knew I saw something." He glanced briefly at me, then back at the road. It kept getting closer, rising up from the dark. At first it was just a shape, but then it got clearer. And I swear to you, what I saw, it looked like a face. My chest tightened. He continued. And then, as I leaned in, trying to get a better look, something reached out of the water, grabbed me. He lifted his sleeve slightly, revealing the damp fabric and a faint red mark on his forearm. That was all he said that day. He wouldn't speak another word about it, not until weeks later, after I'd asked him again, gently, carefully, trying to understand. He hesitated, then tried to explain. But even then, it was vague, fragmented, like he was trying to remember something that didn't want to be remembered. He said it looked almost human. Not quite. The proportions were wrong. The eyes were too wide, the mouth too narrow. There was something deeply unnatural about it. But one line stuck with me. A single sentence that he muttered under his breath, almost like he didn't want to say it out loud. All I know is, it wasn't no fish.